Hello and welcome to another edition of Critical Q&A, the show where I answer your questions based on what you have sent me by email at AskChrisShelton@gmail.com or have left for me in the comment section of my Q&A videos. As always, I prefer you email them to me if you can. That's the easiest way for me to get them into my question queue. I wanted to go out of my way to thank the YouTube membership supporters. If you see below this video on YouTube, a little join button. This is not Join Chris Shelton's Cult, but it is Join Chris Shelton's membership, which is something that helps, give a little bit back to the channel for what you guys get from it. And I hope you will consider doing that. So many of you have. I want to thank all of you. And I also want to thank, of course, my longtime hardcore and all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and very, very much appreciated. You are what is keeping all of this going. So means a lot to me. All right, so let's go ahead and first plug the podcast. I have been a little surprised at I always kind of keep track of the numbers on my videos, especially on the first day. Is this going to be something people want to see? Is this not? And I did an interview on my podcast this week with Dr. Janja Lalich, one of the thought leaders, one of the leaders in the anti-cult field and movement and effort. She is somebody very much worth listening to, and we had a really wonderful talk. It was one of the few interviews I've ever done where I actually wrote down all my questions first because I had so many, and I wanted to really make sure that I gave her good questions because she's not somebody's time I wanted to waste. Not that I want to waste anybody's time, but you know what I mean. So I hope you guys will check out that podcast. And we had a fun show on Friday night considering the meaning of life, but also how that is, of course, utilized or taken advantage of by other more nefarious actors in the world, characters out there you might meet who will be more than happy to give you a meaning for your life if you are having trouble finding one. And maybe that's not always in fact, that's never a good idea. Yeah, okay, let's go ahead and get on with answering your questions. Steph CLO. As we know, during the Masterson trial, there must have been numerous shredding parties at Scientology headquarters and lawyer offices. What are your thoughts on all the recordings of PC sessions? Do you think Miscavige would ever go all Keith Raniere and start recording meetings and everything for posterity? Would they be deleting lawyer videos, etc.? Letters and emails and files are important, but videos can be serious smoking guns too. Just something I thought was interesting, all the digital medias. Okay, thank you for asking about this. And I thought it might be an opportunity to talk a little bit more broadly about what the little tiny bit that I know about David Miscavige and how he operates. Something I don't know that it's ever really been noticed or talked about on any channel, but David Miscavige, when he goes around within the world of Scientology and is doing inspections or visits or meeting with people, all of it is recorded. All of it. There are people, his entourage, who walk around with him, have recorders and notepads, and they keep up with everything he says. It's all taken down. There are binders of dispatch communications, emails, you could say, or letters back and forth with him, giving directives and orders to people, captains of organizations, the personnel at Bridge Publications. I saw these binders of directions just for Bridge Publications or just for the American St. Hill organization or whoever. These conversations back and forth were in writing. But when they weren't, when he was just walking around doing his thing, they were recorded. I saw it. And one of the reasons for this is because he would often walk around doing his inspections and issuing orders to whoever he wanted to, telling him what to do, totally bypassing the entire Scientology command structure in the process, which is something Hubbard said, just kind of mildly might have mentioned once or twice, not really a good idea. Miscavige doesn't care, right? If he's talking to somebody and he wants them to do something, he's going to tell them what to do. And those are recorded and then followed up in writing, right? People will then, I had a conversation with him one time from my job at my desk, and he was walking around in the management area. And he stopped, asked me a couple questions, and then walked on his way. And he had given me an order as a suggestion. And within 10 minutes, I had people come into my desk, other people, other staff in my organization that had gone all the way down there at this point to follow up on and carry out his orders. So it's not like there's even a lot of, time entered into this, but that's just one aspect of Miscavige and how he is recorded for posterity. And when you asked about that, I thought, well, yeah, that's already being done and has been being done for many, many years. That's all recorded somewhere. Somebody's got all that. And the internet age and the computer age were actually a boon for Scientology in terms of its surveillance culture and its reporting snitch culture, because all of those files and all that information can now be digitized and and stored in bits and bytes, and it doesn't have to all be stored in paper in warehouses, which is how things were when Hubbard was around and through all the early years. So now they can put on a thumb drive, a bunch of sessions recorded for Miscavige, or they could have a hard drive that has, that's encrypted, that could have a ton of information on it, all of the Scientology policies, issues, directives. That all is computerized. That's all digital. It's called source information retrieval, or SIR. And that's a software system that exists in Scientology to be able to look up any policy anywhere that Hubbard ever wrote. All the issues of any kind are all in there. And it's not a filtered thing where people at the lower levels have it, but they've filtered out the confidential stuff they're not supposed to have. It's kind of an all or nothing system is how I was told about it by the people who programmed it in INCOM, the computer division in Scientology. Anyway, point is that not everybody has access to all that information. It's an upper level management kind of thing. But it exists. And so anything that could be digitized is something Miscavige might have access to, or OSA might have access to, and probably does. And it probably saves them all kinds of time and money in storage purposes to be able to have all that, because then they can do a shred party and get rid of all the paper, or they can do a shred party and erase videos and incriminating evidence, but keep backup copies at some confidential location buried in a box somewhere that only Miscavige has the keys to, or something like that. Easy for them to do now. Where it wasn't always that way. If we remember those old stories about the file cabinets of the supposedly the OT materials that L. Ron Hubbard had, that passed to Pat Broker, who then ran off with it, and then Marty Rathbun and others went and raided his place and took those file cabinets, thinking that they were taking back the OT levels, and, well, no, that's not really what was in there. So that's kind of how things used to be in Scientology, is all these paper files and file cabinets, running around. Not so much now in the digital age. So anyway, that's all I really wanted to comment on with that. I think that, that there's too much power in that information. And one of the primary reasons that David Miscavige has power, holds power, can keep power, is because of that information that he has access to. And the potential blackmail possibilities of that are one thing. But of course, information or influence peddling is a thing. When you know things about John Travolta, Tom Cruise, other major Scientology celebrities or principal figures who are not just entertainment figures, but also in other industries, when you know everything about them or have access to their deepest, darkest secrets, that gives you, just by implication, without even having to voice a threat or make a big deal about it, you already have power that those people whose secrets they want kept secret, they kind of know about that. So that's kind of a thing. So Miscavige is not going to just, willy-nilly erase stuff or get rid of stuff or shred it and not keep some of that power. If you kind of think about that balancing act that he has to do, with that. So there you go. Gus, just started viewing your channel. I work with a firm that is using the Hubbard Management System, HMS, and many of my colleagues are Scientologists. I am not, nor do I care to be, but I believe in the purposes of the organization. Given your experience, am I going to be a target of being recruited to Scientology? Is using this HMS a negative issue in your mind, and is it, quote, veiled Scientology doctrine? All right, Gus, thanks for asking me about this. And yes, you absolutely are eventually going to be a target of Scientology recruitment if you work at a company run by Scientologists using Hubbard's management system, unless they show a great deal of restraint and are the kind of Scientologists who actually have their head on straight in regards to not mixing religion and work or employment, because there have been lawsuits over this issue where Scientologists who are managers of companies have directed their employees to go down to the local Church of Scientology or otherwise ordered them to do Scientology classes, which is a violation of their rights as employees. You can't order somebody to go take part in religious education or practice. That's just not a line you get to cross as an employer. Employers already have way too much power when it comes to manipulating and influencing their people, and so that just crosses lines that that are actually going to get you in trouble in civil court. However, there are plenty of Scientology managers out there, or Scientology companies that use Hubbard's management system, meaning they're using the policies of L. Ron Hubbard as to how he said to run Scientology organizations, and they're applying it to their own business. The organizing board, the communication system, the dispatch system, the statistics, and using statistics to manage whether areas of your company are producing more, the same, or less compared to another time period. And normally this is done on a weekly basis, and you can also see over time trends and things like that in production. Production goes up, production goes down. You can look at, why did the production go up and down, that kind of thing. This tends to get very short-sighted, though, very quickly with, week-to-week management of employees and situations, which really denies you the bigger, longer-term picture and planning for that longer term because you're so hyper-focused on the 1 week. Anyway, that's just one of many criticisms of the Hubbard management system. It's a big, fully realized thing that will run all the different aspects of interdepartment communication and meetings and statistics and like I said, even the organizing board to lay out the very structure of how the employees operate with each other and communicate to each other. So it's a pretty complete system. And if you're in an organization using that, you are surrounded by Scientology all day, every day, because that's all right out of Hubbard's works. When they converted it over to the management system, they just removed references to Scientology specific stuff. All the rest of it is still exactly the same. So usually using the WISE program, the Hubbard management system, as you say, is a front group effort to bring, good repute to Hubbard. And, of course, Scientologists believe that this policy is the best possible way to run a company, even though Scientology churches are failing miserably all over the world using this system. Right? But these companies, these Scientologists have faith in it, and so they think they're going to run their companies this way. And that always leads to more Scientology in the area. And the employers watching their non-Scientology employees to see, well, if they bite, if they think this is a good thing, if they think this is something useful and important, and where does this come from, and who's this L. Ron Hubbard guy? Let's get this guy into Scientology, and they will definitely go for that. So you need to be careful, Gus, because you're in a situation where you are going to definitely be a recruit target. And it's a shame because you said you believe in the purposes of the organization that you're working for. Well, that's great, but I would get the hell out of there. That's personally, that's what I would do, because the system doesn't work. It is punitive, and the discipline that it enforces is not fair or just. It is only from the viewpoint of the organization. None of Hubbard's policies consider the individual. In fact, if you start thinking about or wanting the employees or your staff to get days off, get better pay, get better working conditions, that's called being worker-oriented, quote unquote, in Scientology. That's a phrase out of Hubbard's policies. Don't be worker-oriented, because if you start thinking about the rights of the employees and and how they're doing, you're not thinking about the good of the company. It's a very black and white thing in Scientology. Surprise. So anyway, like I said, I would get the hell out of there if I were you, and that's my answer. Doug, have you ever had the chance to read any of LRH's non-Scientology materials from back when he was still a writer? And if so, what did you think? From what clips you've shown on your shows, he seems to have some good ideas as far as fiction goes, as well as a special talent for world building, but in my mind is in desperate need of an editor. I've given the book Old Doc Methuselah a read, and while I certainly liked it as a pulp sci-fi, I think that Hubbard played a bit fast and loose with his own rules and was no stranger to the occasional deus ex machina. All right, Doug, thank you. I've commented on this over the years, that Hubbard's writing is atrocious. I can't stand it. The most finished, polished work he has is Battlefield Earth. That's the most readable of his fiction as far as I'm concerned. But his early stuff, his Pulp Fiction stuff, is just trash. I really don't like most of it. Stephen King had good things to say about Fear. I used to think Final Blackout was a really good book as a study on being on leadership. Of course, now I completely disagree with Hubbard's principles on leadership. I've had, some viewpoint changes, you could say, since I left Scientology. And then, you have stories like Old Doc Methuselah or some of his other series, Typewriter in the Sky, things like that. Some people are fans. I'm not. I don't like his dialogue. I think it's atrocious. I think his stories are, somewhat misogynistic in the main, which reflects the times of when he was writing them, I understand, but I still think it's kind of silly. His characters are two-dimensional, really one-dimensional even. They're not fully realized human beings. They are all caricatures rather than characters. They don't reflect reality in any significant way. And Hubbard's always you can always tell he's sort of making himself the hero of his stories. His heroes are how he sees himself. And, his favorite book ever, I think, was 12 Against the Gods, which sort of epitomizes these strong personality stories of people taking on the world and winning or whatever. And Hubbard really saw himself in that mold, even though he was a pansy, wimp who never saw a day of combat and lied constantly about his own actions and deeds. Because he didn't have heroic deeds to fall back on. He was not a heroic figure. He was a scumbag, and he was a liar, and he was a serial abuser. The guy was bad news, but he was very, very delusional in that worldview. And that's what comes across to me in his fiction. That's what I see now. I can't unsee it. It's kind of one of those things of once you know about the guy and once you see his character and who he really was, and you look at that fiction from that point of view of knowing who he was and what he was about, you can't unsee it. At least I can't. I can't suspend my disbelief any more than I can when I see Tom Cruise on the screen anymore. I can't unsee what I see with him. Other characters, other Scientologists who are actors, character actors is what I meant by that. I can suspend disbelief to a degree. I can go, okay, I'm watching an actor do a movie role here. Let's see the character. But I can't do that with Cruise. So, and then of course his writing style and his structuring of his stories, and it's all so predictable. It's always going to very, very predictable places. And he doesn't write with anything like reality in mind. So that's my criticism of Hubbard as a writer. Matt B., do you see street epistemology as a substitute for cult exit counseling? Are the two techniques equivalent? I've been thinking about this for some time now. There's obviously some overlap in that both methods involve questions to stimulate critical thinking about fervent belief, but there are some fundamental, if subtle, distinctions. As I understand it, cult exit counseling has a basis in psychotherapy, while street epistemology is more grounded in philosophy. Some cult exit counselors have raised concerns that street epistemology is not therapeutic, especially when applied to a victim of traumatic abuse like most ex-cult members. I'd like to know what you think. Matt, thank you very much for this question. It's a very good one because there is a distinct and very important differences between doing cult exit counseling and street epistemology. For one, I don't know who the person you're referring to here when you say some cult exit counselors have raised concerns that street epistemology is not therapeutic in your question, but it's never intended to be. Street epistemology is a method of discourse to gain better understanding between two people, or to help somebody gain a better insight or understanding as to where they might have considered or gotten some ideas that they hold dear. And, why do you hold those ideas dear? Where does that idea come from? Have you ever questioned it? What about that idea gives you satisfaction or support or whatever? There's lots of ways and things you could ask in street epistemology that are meant to sort of give a person a little bit more insight into their logic and epistemology, their basis for their understanding what they feel they understand. And it's a conversation. It's meant to be friendly. It's meant to be a rational, friendly discourse. It's not meant to be therapeutic in any way. I am absolutely positive of that. So it's different paradigm, really. When you're doing cult exit counseling or you're helping somebody therapeutically recover from a cult, you're applying treatment modalities to them as a trained therapist. And this is a licensed activity for a reason, because it delves into very sensitive areas for people. And it's a step-by-step process, no matter what therapy, modality you're using. Now, if you're talking about a more light grade sort of, advice or, consultation, like with what I do, where I will work with people who have come out of cult situations or coercive situations, that's educational. That's advice, guidance, direction. It's not therapy. I've stressed that over and over again. In fact, every single time I talk about the kind of consultation work that I do, I say the words, it's not therapy. Because it's not. Therapy, again, is incisive, it's invasive, it's personal, it's sensitive, and you got to kind of be trained and know what you're doing. That's the whole reason we have licensing boards and therapists who go to school and do internships and learn what the hell they're doing. That's not what I'm doing. When I'm working with somebody, I'm trying to educate them. And education is separate from therapy, although they're very, very, or can be very, very related. But they're not the same, right? If I have you go read books or read articles or essays or even do writing exercises or something, that's not therapy, and it's not pretending to be, right? So these are very different things, and street epistemology is something that I very much support and very much believe in as a practice, because I do believe it's the one way that we can use to better understand one another. See, street epistemology often is positioned as a one-way flow, where the interlocutor, the questioner, the person who's asking the questions, is meant to come at this from this position. Well, I know there isn't a God, let's say, and I'm going to talk to you, but instead of telling you that or debating with you, I'm going to ask you questions of an incisive nature about where you're feeling or knowing this information is true or correct. And you tell me what you think, right? Like, well, where did you get that idea? Why do you think that's correct? What does that idea do for you? These are good questions to dig into why a person has beliefs in almost anything, whether it's God or a culture war value or some social value, because it's just kind of exploratory conversation. But it also helps the questioner as much as it does the person who's answering the questions, if they're open to having their own minds changed. in the process of doing their questioning, maybe they also can look to themselves and look at what they believe or think is true, and why do they think so? And it can actually become, a two-way conversation, which I don't think is a bad thing. That's what we want, is good, rational discourse. So that's, but when you're doing therapy or cult exit counseling, it's not that way. The person who's administering the therapy or the counseling is not sitting there expecting to have their mind changed about the cult. I'm not going to do work with somebody, and a therapist isn't going to do work with somebody who comes out of Scientology, listen to what they have to say about Scientology and go, oh, that's a good point. Oh, I think Hubbard had it right about that. That's not the point or the purpose of the activity at all. So there's another distinction between those two practices. And I've had conversations with Anthony Magnabosco on my podcast a few times about street epistemology. I really highly recommend, if you haven't seen those, that you check them out so that it's clear what the differences and similarities are between these things. And that's my flash, kind of off the top of my head answer to your question, Matt. But it's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up. SS. I wanted to see if you have any knowledge of the line charge phenomenon that can happen in auditing. I remember when I was about 12, my dad was getting auditing at Flag and was so blown out that he was unable to stop laughing for days. At the time, my mom said it was normal, but I felt a little freaked out that my dad was having a phone conversation with me, and yet he couldn't stop laughing for more than a few seconds at a time. And now I think my reaction was more appropriate than I realized at the time. I was wondering what was the actual psychological phenomena behind someone laughing like that. All right, thank you for asking me this. And we're going to dive a little bit into the topic of gelotology. That is the study of laughter. And it's actually a thing. Gelotology, study of laughter and its effects on the body from a psychological and physiological perspective. So let's cover a couple things real fast, just in terms of general ideas about laughter and psychology right now. Laughter is a great form of stress relief, and that's no joke. There could be some short-term benefits from a good laugh include stimulating many organs, enhances your intake of oxygen-rich air, stimulates your heart, lungs, and muscles, and increases the endorphins that are released by your brain. They can activate and relieve your stress response. A rollicking laugh fires up and then cools down your stress response, and can increase and decrease your heart rate so you get a good relaxed feeling, and it can soothe tension. Long term, it is actually good for your immune system to be laughing, here and there every now and again. Laughter is the best medicine, as they say. It's actually it releases neuropeptides that help fight stress and potentially more serious illness. It can relieve pain by releasing natural painkillers within your body. It can increase personal satisfaction and connection with other people. And of course, it can improve our mood. There are lots and lots of good reasons why laughing is a good idea. Now, the other thing about laughter, though, is while it does indicate stress relief or relief from anxiety or tension, sometimes there are other reasons people laugh after getting hurt, after others get hurt, sometimes during nervousness or discomfort, a person will laugh. Sometimes people laugh when they get mad. And then there is this bit I'll read here from in more detail about how sometimes people can laugh for no reason whatsoever. This can be disturbing to people when they are just suddenly laughing out of nowhere. This type of laughter may be due to what's called pseudobulbar effect, PBA, which describes laughter outbursts unrelated to an individual's emotional state. Pseudo-bulbar effect is related to a neurological condition that results in a person showing emotions in inappropriate or exaggerated ways, such as hysterical laughter or crying. And maybe some of this was demonstrated in that movie Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, where he would just laugh, inappropriately. This has sometimes been confused with depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia. It is a treatable condition. Then there is laughing as a sign of a disorder. Like pseudobulbar effect, other disorders can sometimes manifest as inappropriate laughter. Paradoxical laughter occurs for no reason and is related to an individual's mental state, as I think is probably the closest thing we've seen so far to describing what you ran into with your father. A person experiencing unstable moods, schizophrenia, or other mental illness may display paradoxical laughter. And I am in no way saying that your father is mentally ill here. I am just reading what it says, in that unstable moods might be a reason for paradoxical laughter of that kind. It could be a thyroid problem, could be something called Graves' disease, which involves hormone production. I mean, this is kind of how that sort of thing goes. But in Scientology, you referenced line charts. So let's go ahead and talk about that for a second, because it is a phenomena that occurs from time to time. Line charge in Scientology is the term that's used for when somebody enters into uncontrollable laughter as a result of an auditing action. They just enter this sort of gleeful, ah, ha, 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 sort of state, and they just can't stop laughing. And this could very well indicate a release or a catharsis of anxiety or stress. Okay, it very well could. We talk about the fact that Scientology auditing induces blissful, euphoric states by design. So could you have such a thing go, where to the point where a person actually does experience relief? Of course. And could that relief manifest in, days or maybe minutes, is how it usually goes, by the way, is just minutes, not hours or days. But I have heard stories, and your question is, of course, like that, where a person will just be laughing for days and days. Not necessarily straight, like just nonstop laughter, but they'll break out into laughter often. Certainly I experienced phenomena like that for brief periods of time following an auditing session. I think it happened maybe once or twice in 27 years. So it wasn't a common thing, but it could be, just a relief. Wow. And that's and now it's funny to you because it was so stressful, such a source of worry or upset or concern for so long. And then a person has a realization, oh, it's really not that big of a deal. Oh, I can let it go. Oh, wow. That was not at all as serious as I thought it was. Ah, ha, 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 right? And that's perfectly legit. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. But where it goes on for days and you can't even talk to the person because they won't stop, that's where I think we're entering into this pseudo-bulbar effect and maybe something a little bit more serious going on that maybe, could indicate something bad. And in the world of Scientology, of course, we always have to account for the fact that things are almost always worse than you think they are. That is a truism in Scientology I've found over and over again. So while I'm trying to offer some more rational or some alternative explanations for why that behavior might have happened with your father or why that might happen in Scientology, it's probable that it's something more disorderly. And so that's why I wanted to read from that. Laughter, it can be fun at times, it can be healing, but if it's inappropriate or unhealthy, it is something that you might want to look more seriously into. And there you go. Paul, I wanted to ask you a question about the OT levels. Given LRH's obsession with the number 8, the infinity symbol as a sideways 8, and the lack of materials for levels above OT8, would any Scientologist make a connection that OT8 should be the final and ultimate OT level, and therefore there should not be any levels above it? Probably not, given the fact that for decades now there has been a grade chart that shows levels all the way up to OT15. Why they did that, I have no idea. Perhaps there is some L. Ron Hubbard issue somewhere, or some bulletin somewhere, some notes that he made somewhere that indicate that there are 15 OT levels planned or in his mind, or somehow that's how many there should be. But for whatever reason, however it happened, whether Hubbard said it or not, ever since the 1980s, there has been an idea that there are 15 OT levels. So to renege on that at this point would be somewhat suicidal for David Miscavige, because everybody now knows that OT8 is not the end of the line. In fact, that has always been promoted as the first true OT level, but not the last one. It's the first one where you start gaining native state powerful abilities back. Whereas all the earlier levels, all the way up through OT7, are negative case gain. They are levels that are taking trauma and stress and charge away from you, or you're exorcising your body thetans, and so you're removing things from you. And OT8 is supposed to be the first level where you're gaining spiritual abilities back. So that milk's already been spilt, so to speak, right? That cat's already out of the bag. There's no going back on it. It very well could have been back in the 80s that Miscavige or whoever could have capped it at OT8, said, yep, it's infinity on its side. That's absolutely OT8. It is the top level. There is no more. But that would have capped Scientology. And then people would have been done. And the whole point of the con of Scientology is for there never to be an end. Ever. And that's something people, we don't really talk about much, but maybe some should be considered a little bit more, is it's the nature of the con of Scientology that there is always more. More to pay for, more to do, more to involve yourself in. That's why all the control structures and everything are built to keep you in. You never get out, right? Once you get in, you never get out. That's kind of Scientology at its heart, as far as the nature or the sort of the framework of the con. So that's another reason why Miscavige and anybody else who takes over Scientology can never let this kind of thinking, as you've asked in your question here, that they just can't let that kind of thinking go on in Scientology. So that's why that would never. That's just no Scientologist is going to ever be allowed to really go there. There you go. All right, and that is our show for this week. Thank you very much for coming around and watching and listening. If you've invited me into your home through my audio podcast, I hope these answers were informative, educational, and entertaining as always. And look forward to my show with Tony Ortega tomorrow after Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, and the rest of the lineup. I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.